WPP.
The fourth level of learning, paper number 9, an introduction to the underworld. What is the underworld? When we hear of the underworld, and if we have any clue what it is, we are probably thinking about Greek mythology and where the souls go after the physical body dies. These days, some believe that we go upward, leaving our dead body beneath us. Then, perhaps, one or a few spirit guides come and show us the way toward the light and the tunnel. The spirit guides can be dead relatives, ancestors, or good friends in the earthly existence. The common theme is that they all seem to lead a discarnate spirit toward the tunnel and the light. We've been discussing this to some extent in all levels of learning, I believe, and also in my ebook, Beyond 2012, A Handbook for the New Era 1. This belief system is based on testimonies from dead people who have either channeled through a medium, or it has been revealed in regression therapy, where most people, put in reverie, tell almost identical things of what happens after we die. However, what did the old Greeks believe, and those before them or those living simultaneously with them but in different locations? They believed that instead of going upward towards some mysterious light, the dead spirit traveled downward, into the underworld and the afterlife. The underworld, or Hades, was a dark place, invisible for the living, located beneath the depths or the ends of the world, too. Once a person was dead, the spirit took on the form of the person she had been while alive on the surface and was transported to the entrance of Hades. There were 7 rivers leading down to the underworld, where the river Styx is probably the most well-known. Usually, there was a ferryman, Charon, who transported the dead over the dark river for the continuous journey further down into the underworld. The river Phlegethon was the river of fire, and according to Plato, this was the river which led to Tartarus, where the Titans were supposed to have been thrown down after the Titan War. Apparently, Tartarus is not directly a part of Hades but is located as far beneath Hades as the sky is to the earth. But, what was the underworld, and was it real? Interestingly, on a recent Pleiadian lecture at the beginning of 2013, they described how their vehicle, their medium, had been extremely sick at the end of 2012 with gastrointestinal issues that almost killed her. The Pleiadians explained that Barbara Marciniak had been visiting the underworld and returned, and they were quite serious about its validity. In the end, Marciniak pledged to the Pleiadians, saying that if they didn't help her now in her painful misery, they wouldn't have a vehicle to transmit their messages through because she believed she was dying. Supposedly, the Pleiadians helped by releasing her from the underworld. That shouldn't be too difficult for them because one of their mentors, Lord En.Ki, resides down there and is the king of the underworld, under the name of Nergal. Although En.Ki may take care of his cohorts when needed, as in Marciniak's case, they didn't do so when it came to Dr. A.R. Borden, who died the most painful cancer death a person can experience, and he received no assistance from En.Ki. According to ancient Egyptian tablets, Thoth is the deity who is leading the dead down through the layers of the underworld. All this is also acting as an inspiration to Dante's Inferno 3, with its 7 layers of hell. Allegedly, there are 7 layers or gates, until a person has reached all the way down to where Queen Ereshkigal's throne is. In many myths, it is the well-known AIF member, Thoth, who puts judgment on the soul and decides her destiny. Figure 1. Thoth, depicted as an ibis bird. Again, here we have the bird tribe. The Greek and Egyptian explanation to what happens in the afterlife is that we are going on a journey through the astral dimensions of the underworld, located under the earth's surface. This is also the reason why pharaohs often were put in their sarcophaguses together with their most beloved belongings, sometimes also with their pets, such as cats and dogs, which are very psychic animals, by the way, and worked as psychic influences in the royal courts. They wanted all this to be brought with them to the underworld. They even took their faithful servants with them to the afterlife, people who had worshipped them, more human sacrifice. All this was considered assisting the pharaoh in his afterlife, in which he expected to become like the gods, granted eternal life. In some stories, there are 7 gates to the underworld, while in others, there are 12. Typically, in the Egyptian religion, the number is 12 gates, while the Sumerian stories talk of 7 gates. The 12 gates represented the 12 hours of the night. When the pharaoh had passed all the 12 gates, it was dawn. 4. As soon as the pharaoh had been mummified and his coffin closed, his journey through the underworld began. Each gate had its own purpose and test that the pharaoh had to accomplish in order to get to the next gate. 5. Eventually, when he had successfully passed the 12th gate, he ascended as Ra, the sun god. He became the sun. 6. It was very important that the pharaoh was able to complete the tasks in the underworld because if he failed, the sun would no longer appear in the sky of the living, and life would cease on earth. Therefore, if the sun still arose in the sky the day after the night when the pharaoh began his journey, the Egyptians knew that the pharaoh had succeeded. In other words, more fear-based religion. 7. Did the pharaohs ever become the sun? Of course not. Like so much else, it's all deception, but the Egyptians believed in it, religiously. In reality, the underworld is just another metaphor for the entrapment of souls in the afterlife and the cycles of reincarnation. So, are the astral planes actually located under the surface of the earth? We need to keep in mind that many of these stories stem from a time before the flood, and it was not until after the deluge that Marduk and En.Ki set up today's entrapment system, including the grid, something we will talk about more later. However, I have no problem believing that once upon a time, souls got reprogrammed for another life somewhere beneath our feet but in another dimension. 2. The underworld and the afterlife. I have written on the subject of the afterlife and the AIF entrapment of souls before, starting with manipulation of deceptive spirit guides, sometimes in the form of deceived relatives and friends, who are guiding the discarnate soul through the tunnel and further into the realm of entrapment. I think that here it is important to make a statement that our spirit guides, who often are beings who genuinely care about us, but can also be our own oversoul, are serious in their attempts to assist us, both in life and in the afterlife. You can call for them while still in incarnation here on Gaia if you need help or advice, and if you specifically ask them to help you, they will. Although, you may think that when you die the next time, you will know more than the spirit guides did when they were amongst the living, so why would you ask them? Well, once you leave the earth plane and get used to being dead, you see things from a totally different perspective. You can see what is going on down here, all at once, from a bird's eye perspective, but you will also become more psychic. Therefore, it is appropriate to ask the guides for help because they can see things that you can't, from your limited view. Even when relatives guide you into the tunnel of light, they do so with your best interest in mind because that is all they know. There is still a lot of deception on the other side, just like it is here. In the between life area, the BLE, there are many beings working. The ones in charge are either members of the AIF or discarnate humans, who the AIF have trained to do the job for them. However, there are certain entities, we all know who they are by now, who are in charge of the BLE. The Queen of Entrapment is Queen Ereskigel, and Lucifer, aka En.Ki, aka Nurgle, aka E is the male in charge. Other beings are also known to be working in liaison with them. These beings are En.Ki's son, Marduk, Utu Samas, and Hermes Thoth of Rigel. However, keep these names in mind because we are eventually going to look into whom these beings really are. I find it very interesting when I research that the Pantheon, the Sumerian, Akkadian, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman records, and all the ancient scriptures of all their different kinds seem to describe so many different beings. It is very confusing at first, and it's hard to break it all down into some kind of consistency. Nevertheless, I notice, to my great surprise, that it's the same handful of ET individuals who are changing names, titles, positions, and whereabouts over and over. Therefore, in reality, we are dealing with only a very few beings, pretending to be many. This is part of the deception. They want us to believe that they are populating the earth in quantities, when in fact, they are not. This will become more obvious as we go along. If we again go back to look at the underworld where Queen Ereskigel was the primordial ruler, she was personally trapping souls there and was not allowing them to leave. This is told over and over again in our mythology. Once the BLA became more sophisticated, if this is the right word to use, things changed, but souls are still being trapped in the afterlife and sent back to Earth to serve the gods in one way or another. An additional hypothesis is that the BLA and the underworld are both existing today, in unison. The Pleiadians, when they were discussing Barbara Marciniak's journey through the underworld, it could have been a metaphor, but I got the impression that it was not. Marciniak was actually there, and when she is discussing her illness with her closest friends, she is stating the same thing, that the underworld actually exists. If it still exists, what purpose does it fill? Perhaps, its purpose is as a judgment place for some souls before they enter the BLA. I am still not sure. After all, judgment was what it was all about in the ancient days, when Hermes Thoth supposedly led the recent dead downward and judged his or her soul. Now let us look a little deeper at those deities who have put themselves in charge of humanity and the entrapment system, and let's start with En.Ki, Marduk, and Utu and look at how names and titles have been changed, but once exposed, they reveal something astonishing behind the facade. If we look up the god Sin in Wikipedia, we find the following highlights. Sin was the god of the moon in the Mesopotamian mythology of Akkad, Assyria and Babylonia. 8. He is commonly designated as Ansu, which means Lord of Wisdom. 9. Sin was naturally regarded as the head of the pantheon. It is to this period that we must trace such designations of Sin as Father of the Gods, Chief of the Gods, Creator of all things, and the like. 10. Now, let's look up En.Ki. En.Ki was considered the master shaper of the world, god of wisdom and of all magic. 11. If we compare notes, here is one important detail to be aware of. In the first quote, it says that Sin is commonly designated as Ansu, Lord of Wisdom, which god is really designated the title, Lord of Wisdom. As we can see, it's En.Ki. Likewise, En.Ki is known as the head of the pantheon, an attribute here designated to Sin. Moreover, he is the Father of the gods and the Creator of all things, two more things that are normally related to En.Ki. So, here we see how one god is taking the cloak of another. Now, let's go back to Sin again to bring this story further. His, Sin's, wife was Ningal, great lady, who bore him Utu Shamash, son. The tendency to centralize the powers of the universe leads to the establishment of the doctrine of a triad consisting of Sin, Nana, and his children. 12. So, interestingly enough, Sin, or should we say En.Ki, had a son, Utu Shamash, the sun god. First of all, this shows that Utu is not connected to the house of En.Lil, but to the house of En.Ki. More importantly, however, Utah is looked at as the sun god. Wasn't there another son of En.Kis who actually was known as the sun god? That's right, Marduk. Could it really be that Utu Shamash and Marduk are one and the same? Well, before we look into that some more, note also that Sin and Nanner are also one and the same, according to the old records, see quotes above. The readers who have a very good memory may recall that Dr. A.R. Borden and his LPGC team were in contact with the Nibiruans, and according to Dr. Borden in his essay, The Link, 13, there was a change in command amongst the Nibiruan gods sometime in the 1400s. A new Khan En.Lil stepped down, and Nanner took his place, according to this source. Can the reader see what's going on here? Anu is Khan En.Lil. This we have learned. Therefore, the AIF wants to make it official, in present time, that Khan En.Lil is no longer in charge of anything, and Nanner is taking over, officially. Now, who is Nanner? He is Sin, who goes back to En.Ki. What Dr. Borden is saying, in other words, in his usual cryptic way, is that En.Ki is now officially the head of the Anunnaki. However, the king of Nibiru will not present himself as the En.Ki but as his alias, Nanner. Borden mentions in The Link that the En.Ki or Marduk were not appropriate for the lofty position to become the king of Nibiru because they had screwed up too much here on Earth, Borden's own words. So, that takes the official En.Ki out of the picture, but he still claims the position via the name of King Nanner. We also see whom Dr. Borden was working with before he died. Interesting, also, is that Dr. Borden, just like Sitchin, claims that Nanner is the grandson of En.Lil. Metaphorically, and these things are very important for these people, Nanner rules via the house of En.Lil while he covertly is En.Ki himself. Doesn't that cover it all? En.Ki claims rulership both over the house of En.Lil and the house of En.Ki. Of course, the whole Nibiru issue is a farce. Nibiru is a battleship and not the home planet of the Anunnaki. Now back to the Utu issue. We have Sin En.Ki, whose son, according to the old records, is Utu Samas, the sun god. But then we asked ourselves, isn't Marduk the sun god? Are they one and the same? If we look up Utu in Wikipedia, we find this quite interesting information. Marduk is spelled Mr.Utu in Sumerian, literally, the calf of Utu or the young bull of the sun. 14. So, Marduk is spelled Mr.Utu in Sumerian. Don't we have too many coincidences here? So, what I am hinting at is that Utu Samas and Lord Marduk are one and the same. This also means that the extraterrestrial being I was contacted by in 2011, who presented himself as Utu Samas, was most likely no one less than Lord Marduk himself. 15. There is more, however, showing that Sin is the son of Khan En.Lil and Queen Nin, which is further evidence that he is the En.Ki's counterpart. I also find it interesting that Sin has a beard made of lapis lazuli, which is Lucifer's stone, also used by his son, Marduk. Sin had a beard made of lapis lazuli and rode on a winged bull. The bull was one of his symbols, through his father, Enlil, bull of heaven, along with the crescent and the tripod, which may be a lampstand, an important Sumerian text. Enlil and Ninlil tells of the descent of Enlil and Ninlil, pregnant with Nina Sin, into the underworld. 16. Now the readers start to understand what I mean when I say that we can narrow down the players in this cosmic drama to just a few renowned beings. Of course, these beings have armies behind them, where the soldiers are never named, but the beings we read about in the ancient texts can be narrowed down this way. Important also is that the AIF, creating the patriarchal regime, had to get rid of the original gods and goddess, and the best way to do it was to replace them with themselves. This way, they didn't have to completely erase the memories of the old golden age and the time before that, when Mother Goddess was here. All they needed to do was to take their place. So, when appropriate, they changed gender of the original gods and goddesses and made the feminine deities into males and stole titles and names and used them for themselves. To complete my statement about LPGC and its cooperation with En.Ki, we can now see that it is most probably working with Marduk, him being the same person as Utu Samas. Conclusions. The main characters in charge of the AIF on Earth today are, thus far, narrowed down to 4, Lord En.Ki, Lord Marduk, Hermes Thoth, aka Ningishzuda and Quetzalcoatl, and Queen Ereshkigal. Then we have Isis and Anna Lilith Ishtar, but she was not in charge. These entities then have had the tendency, throughout time, to multiply themselves in the mind of mankind, as each one of them took on the role of many deities. One of the most famous ancient stories about the underworld is that of Inanna's descent to the underworld. Inanna, we have learned from previous papers, is one and the same as Ishtar, Lilith, and Isis, to name a few, just different aspects of the same goddess. Thus far, we have established that the underworld, more or less, seems to be ruled by 4 different deities, En.Ki as Nergal, Ereshkigal, Mardakutu, and Hermes Thoth 17. Where, then, does Inanna fit into the picture? Did she actually descend to the underworld and stay there as a 5th deity, or is this a cover-up as well in order to confuse? Inanna's relation to Ereshkigal is many-faceted, and depending on which story we subscribe to, if any, we learn different things. Some say that Ereshkigal was Inanna's elder sister, 18, while others say that Inanna and Ereshkigal are one and the same, 19, where Inanna represents the lighter side of the goddess and Ereshkigal the darker. Essentially, it seems as if the queen of the underworld took on the persona of Inanna to create a bigger playground for herself. 3. The Queen of the Underworld. In a Sumerian epic called The Legend of Nergal and Ereshkigal, found in Tel El Amarna in Egypt, dating all the way back to the 15th or 14th centuries BC 20, a very interesting story is told. This story, however, is much older than that and goes back to a time, probably 100,000 years ago, or more. As we know, at one time Lucifer proclaimed himself En.Ki, which means Lord of Earth. This story, however, tells us exactly how and why he gave himself this title and also reveals to us even more that Nergal and the En.Ki are the same being. The story tells us how Lucifer, here in the name of Nergal, is storming the 7 gates of the underworld in order to get to the self-proclaimed queen of the underworld, Ereshkigal. Once he manages to break down the 7 gates and gets to the queen, he engages himself in a 6-day-long love-making session with the goddess, 21, which sounds like rape to me, because he took the underworld by force. Figure 2. Throne of Nergal and Ereshkigal. According to this Egyptian version, there is a reason why Nergal Lucifer is storming the underworld, which is that Ereshkigal apparently is in possession of something very powerful that Nergal wants. According to the text, Ereshkigal says after the 6-day-long love-making session, "You can be my husband, and I can be your wife. I will let you seize kingship over the wide earth. I will put the tablet of wisdom in your hand. You can be a master, I can be mistress." 22. So, it sounds like Queen Ereshkigal, defeated, makes Nergal an offer. She is in possession of these desirable tablets of wisdom, and probably only she knows where they are, which perhaps saves her life. In exchange for the tablets, not only is she allowed to live, but she will also still remain the queen of the underworld. All she needs to do is to offer Nergal kingship over the whole earth, including the underworld, where they can rule together. In some versions of this story, Nergal and Ereshkigal get married, but this old Egyptian version makes more sense, because On.Ki/Nergal was already married to Isis. Instead, Ereshkigal becomes his mistress. Due to the story, Nergal agrees and not only becomes the king of the underworld, but claims the whole planet as his and starts calling himself Lord En.Ki, King of Earth. Supposedly, by possessing these tablets, he finally believes he's in charge of planet Earth for real. Apparently, also included with these tablets were some magic stones, which we will discuss more in due time. Interesting also is that the story of one of these stones, an exceptionally clear quartz crystal, is told in Chinese and Japanese traditions. This stone is now located in the Moscow Museum. The stone is called the Chintamani stone, and according to the mythos, this stone is known as the jewel that grants all desires. It is believed that it was once in possession of the Makara, a dragon or dolphin god, living in a palace at the bottom of the sea. Who, then, is a dragon dolphin god, living at the bottom of the sea? The readers know the answer. His name is En.Ki. If this stone, sitting in the Moscow Museum, is actually one of En.Ki's stones, is disputable, but the story around it is quite fascinating because the powers of the stone are very similar to those of the tablets of destinies and the stones that are associated with them. How Ereshkigal possessed the powerful tablets of destinies is a mystery, however. These tablets were not hers to begin with and passed ownership many times during the history of Earth. In reality, the tablets are extremely old, perhaps almost as old as the universe itself, and include the memories thereof. Figure 3. Ereshkigal in the Underworld. I have known for some time that the tablets of destinies have had a somewhat leading role in the War of the Gods, and whoever has possession of them has the potential to obtain the most power. Nevertheless, as with any stone or device, what kind of powers it has depends on who is programming it. The author, who has put the pieces together in the most coherent and intelligent way of all researchers I've come in contact with, and I'm talking about both the tablets of destiny and ancient history, is Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. 23. He is an American theologian, a scholar on the East-West Schism, and the author of several books in history, alternative history, and science, to name a few. He is also adjunct professor of patristic theology and apologetics at California Graduate School of Theology, and he's an organist, plays the harpsichord, and is a composer of classical music. 24. Wikipedia states the following about Dr. Farrell. A student of Timothy Ware, Farrell became a professor of patristics at St. Tychon's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Citation needed. He also holds an MA from Oral Roberts University, a BA from John Brown University, and is a doctoral graduate, D.Phil, of Pembroke College, Oxford University with specialty in patristics awarded in 1987. 25. Therefore, he started out as a theologian and a historian, one may presume, and learned the traditional way, studying under Timothy Ware, one of the best-known contemporary Eastern Orthodox theologians in the world. 26. From there, he must have thought that what he had learned was not always correct, so he began to research alternative theology and history instead, and he did so with honor, I must say. The book, which corresponds the most to this level of learning, is his The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics, and Ancient Texts. Figure 4. Dr. Joseph Farrell, author and researcher. Dr. Farrell has taken what must have been a considerable amount of time researching the Tablets of Destiny, and a good part of his book is spent on these tablets. Before I ran into his work, I had become quite discouraged because there didn't seem to be much relevant information on this material on the internet, nor in books. However, Farrell has found a few sources that he is using in his work, who are indeed quite helpful. I read Farrell's book and was quite impressed. Therefore, I'm going to use Dr. Farrell and a few other relevant sources when I present the story of the Tablets of Destiny for the readers in the next paper. It's quite an amazing story. In the beginning of this section, I told the readers how Nergal stormed the Underworld and possessed these mystical stones. In order to save her life, Queen Ereskigel gave Lord Yen.Ki the Tablets of Destiny, which she had hoarded in her Underworld palace. However, Queen Ereskigel was not the first person who was in possession of the Tablets of Destiny. She was only one in a line of beings. When we begin discussing the tablets, we're going to see what they really are and where they are located now. Paper 10 will obviously be about the Tablets of Destiny, but a lot more will also be said about Nergal, Ereskigel, and the Underworld in future papers.